Hi everybody, it's Annette from The Art of Intuition, and today we are going to talk about animals. So yesterday I did have the opportunity to be in an animal hospital for 3 to 4 hours, and I observed a lot of different energies going on, and energies going on with myself also, because anytime you feel, kind of gets back into the empath thing, people will say, oh, I feel everyone else's sadness. It just triggers your own sadness. If you carry sadness, you're going to feel sadness, but it's your own. It's not anybody else's. So anyway, while I was in the animal hospital yesterday, I checked out a lot of the stuff that was going on, because we will do that. The more conscious we become, we start to just observe, observe all the interactions. And it kind of spawned me to want to do a video regarding animals and our relationship with animals and what they really are doing. Because you always will hear people say, this animal, acts one way, and then with another person, maybe the animal acts a different way. Animals help us open up. That's the reason why we have animals. Cats are usually geared a little more toward the very linear people. People open up, the linear people open up to a cat, maybe over a dog. The cats have a different energy than dogs. They're cats to me are a little more galactic. Dogs kind of have a more soul energy feel to them. They don't have the detachedness kind of sometimes that the cats can have. And there are a lot of different galactic races. So some cats can be a little more loving than others. It just kind of depends on really the animal, but that kind of depends on something else. And that's one of the focuses I want to do today, is exactly what they're showing you. Animals are just aspects of you, right? Just like people are. And people will show you a different aspect of yourself. And animals will do the same thing. Animals are going to project back at you your most dominant, strongest aspect, majority of the time. And in between there, they're going to shift between a lot of different aspects of you. But they're still you. They're just showing you different things. I remember years ago, there was this lady that I used to go to this workout place, and there's a lady who'd bring her dog and put the dog in a cage and work out in front of the dog. And she would say that the dog had anxiety and could not be without her. But it was more her own anxiety, and the dog mirrors it back. So every issue we ever have with animals in that sense is because it's really us. They're showing us what's inside us. They're showing us different parts of us. They're showing us different pieces of us. But it's still us. So, and that's why you're going to see animals react differently, behave differently when they're around different people, because they're going to mirror the strongest aspect of that person. Either the strongest aspect or an aspect they're trying to show you, right? But they're still just you, which is going to lead me to when it's time for animals to go. And that was a big theme for me kind of yesterday, when it's time for them to go and why we don't like that and what it represents to us. So if you think of an animal, it represents something to you. It's not so much about the animal. And a lot of these videos we talk about, it's the feeling about the thing. It's not the thing. Animals represent different timelines. They might represent when your kids were little. They might represent when, your kids left. They might represent when you were married. They might represent when you got divorced. They might represent when you were a child. There might have been a timeline when you had this animal and you were in college. It's going to represent a different piece and a part of you and a different time in your life. And animals have a different life cycle than we do for a reason. Because they're mirroring back aspects of you. They're just you. But you're going to shift aspects as you go through life. And as you shift aspects, the dominant aspects in those animals are no longer the most dominant aspect in your life. So the animal has to go with that aspect of you. As you transcend that aspect, the animal has to go with it. If you want to think about it, we can think about it in a different way, as if you try to hold on to the animal, which, we've all done that in certain times. It's always that question of, is it too early or is it too soon, when you get to that choice where you can make the choice for the animal. And that is one of the biggest parts about having animals, is majority of the time you get to make the choice when it's done. We get to make the choice when it's over. We get to make the choice, whereas for humans, we don't get to make that choice, but for animals, we do. Sometimes, majority of the time, we get to make the choice when the timeline is done. The final done. We don't get to make the choice of when the timeline is done, but we don't like it to be done. We don't want it to be done. So we try to drag the timeline out, and we kind of drag the animal with us in a sense, because we don't want that timeline to end, because they represent something. You know, they represent a part of us. They represent everything that has come before, everything they've shared with us, that aspect of us. So you're going to find that when you start getting to these choices, that it brings up a lot of shame, it brings up a lot of guilt, it brings up a lot of blame, because you don't really know what to do. You don't know whether you should say goodbye to the animal, keep the animal around. And the easiest way to explain this is we really have to look at the energy as to why we're trying to keep them here. What energy are we coming from? Are we being selfish trying to keep them here? Do we not want to let that animal go and get beyond the animal and look at what it represents to you? Because it's going to represent something. They come and go at very specific times for a reason. It's just like any contract you have with a person or a place. You have the same contract with an animal. Even when people leave or people die, it's kind of the same thing. They have to do that because their time is done. And them staying around hampers the next thing we have to go do. So they really can't stay any longer. It always is going to get to that go point where that's it. You can drag the timeline out as long as you want to, but it's going to get to that point when that's the end of the timeline, because there's other things you have to go do. You're trying to also transcend that aspect of you. And that's going to sound kind of a little, maybe distorted a little bit, especially if you're like, but the animal is so sweet and kind. You know, why do I have to transcend that aspect? It's the different traits of the animal. It's not even the animal itself. It's just the aspect they're showing you. It is what they represent to you. It's everything tied up in the animal that has to go with the timeline. A lot of times you'll see animals leave at very certain markers. You know, kids have graduated from high school, or, you know, we just had a baby, or it'll be different. Majority of the time, it's a different time in your life. I'm just about to move to a new state. I just got divorced. There'll be different times when you start going through this. Now, sometimes we might have that scare with the animal where it looks like they might be leaving, but they're not yet. And it's just for us to start detaching the cords from them. That's why they'll start going away. You know, if they always slept with, I had an animal that slept with me pretty much every night since I had her. And then all of a sudden she started sleeping somewhere else. And you know, your human is like, oh, you know, what's going on? But it's deep down, you know, they're trying to separate the cords. You know, they're trying to know, hey, I'm going to be leaving soon, and I gotta go. I remember having conversations with, when I was in my different timelines, and I was married at the time, about when was the right time for an animal we had. And I remember the conversation, and it was like, you know, the animal's not going to get younger with us, with this timeline. You know, there's no ending for the animal where they're born again in this current timeline, in this current trajectory we're on. We have to make that decision for that to start occurring, you know, for that next stage to start occurring. It's not going to happen here. You know, so you're just kind of holding on to an old timeline. You're holding on to something, and we really have to look at why. It's very important for us to look at why we're doing it. Take the animal out of it. What does it represent to you? What is it? Because a lot of times when we're in our human consciousness, we don't see the vastness of what goes on next, you know, what happens next. And I really couldn't see it till I got to a certain space with my consciousness where there are little flashes, you know, here and there, even though I transcended an aspect of me years ago. And that a different one animal would have represented that aspect of me. And when she was gone, I grieved a very long time. And it's not to say we don't want to grieve, because we do want to grieve. And these are very emotional choices for people. And we want to have compassion when we're in that choice, compassion for ourselves when we're in that choice, and when we're trying to make these decisions and to grieve. Because it's very important for the human to grieve anything that ends. It's really critical for us to do that, because the human does need that. But there's a part where you start to look at, if you do get another animal, you get a new animal, and they'll always say, well, there'll never be one like the one I just had. That's because you're not the same anymore. They won't be the same because you're no longer the same. It's going to flash a different aspect at you. It's going to flash either an aspect you're going towards. It's going to flash an aspect of you that you might even know you have. It's going to activate an aspect in you. Animals do amazing things. They're showing you pieces and parts and facets of you, but I will guarantee you, if you look close enough, you're going to see a little glimmer of something that's going to remind you of another one. And I'll do it with mine, and it'll just be little something here and there, and you might get a flash in your head of the other ones, all the ones that have come before, because technically they're all those too. The animal's just part of us. They're just an aspect of us. They really never go anywhere. We just transcend the aspect. We transcend the timelines. The timelines have to go. We have to get into a new timeline. But somewhere in our cellular memory, somewhere in our cellular body, that aspect's still there. And I'll watch one of mine now, and they'll do something, and that one of my other animals that's been gone for years will flap in my head, and I'm like, oh, there you are. Because they're just us. They can never leave, in a sense, because they're just going to show you another piece and part of you. So the other ones are always in there somewhere. They're just not your dominant aspect anymore. They don't have the same purpose they had served before. So they might be in your cellular programming somewhere. You might have completely transcended them. Maybe they're just somewhere setting in your field. Maybe it's just a little wink and a nod sometimes. It's like, yeah, I'm still in here. I'm just not the dominant aspect you're seeing right now because you transcended that aspect. Now you're going to see this other aspect. I kind of look at it a little differently than if anyone saw the movie The Dog's Purpose, where they went on to something completely different every time. I feel like we kind of get the same, we get like a mosh posh because it's still just refracting back us at us. You know, it's just we're looking at ourselves and we just get different parts of ourselves and a different piece of ourselves. And we don't get something completely different. Even though at the time it might feel completely different because it's an aspect we might not realize we're doing. It's an aspect we're trying to get to. But there is a purpose to all of it when it happens. And the most important thing we can do is like anything I've done that I've talked about holding up a timeline or holding on to an old timeline. Animals are a big one we try to hold on to. We have so much wrapped up in them. We have so much love for them because they open our heart up so much. And when they go, we grieve so hard. We grieve so hard. I could start crying thinking about and grieving again, you know, over some of mine have been gone for years. We grieve so hard because it's also all those cords of attachment are coming up. All that sadness that they're activating is coming up. They're just activating all these things that come up. All those old aspects of us to clear. All that old timeline, the energy of that old timeline, the energetics of that old timeline they represented to come up and clear. And that's kind of the point. It's not really about that. It's what they're showing us, who they're showing us. So if you're getting a new one, if it's time to say goodbye to an old one, look for the old one and the new one a little bit because you'll be surprised what you're going to see. You'll be surprised. A lot of people think, oh, the old one flashed in my head when I walked by the new one. It's not a coincidence, you know? And from time to time, that aspect of you might come out to play again because there'll be little things that mine will do and I'll be like, boy, that's just like so-and-so to a T. But we kind of dismiss a lot of that stuff and think they're also separate. But they're just you. They're just different aspects of you. So, all right. I'm going to leave it here. This one's a little heavy, but I did want to get it out here. For anyone that is kind of in this place to remember that they do go on and do amazing things. They have many journeys, not just the ones we show us, and we get a new one and it's just going to show you something else. And even if you're in a household with multiple animals and they seem totally different because you have totally different aspects too. Maybe those two aspects are fighting it out for dominance. Look which one's winning all the time. So anyway, just start looking. Get away from the animal and start looking. And if you are keeping one around and you know it's kind of time, look at who's gaining from that, what you're trying to gain from that. Look at the story you're telling yourself. Look at if you're twisting the story. A human's going to twist the story to make it sound like we're not. I'm going to use the word selfish because the human isn't inherently selfish. Look who's making the choice. Is it our highest aspect or is it our human aspect that doesn't want to let what that animal represents go? Okay. Keep practicing the art of intuition.